ultimately received a high growth phase during 2004 to 12. This was the most significant period in which India registered a high growth phase,
Yeah,
registering a growth about 8.5%. But in the subsequent period, 2014 to 19, we see that in the pre-COVID period, India had a slowdown, major slowdown, and the unemployment rates were rising.
yeah,
This was intensified in the during the COVID period, and India was one of the worst hit economies. In the first quarter of the COVID, India recorded a negative GDP growth rate of 23.9%. Unemployments were subsequently high, and it reached an all-time high of 8% in 2023.
mm,
The external sector macroeconomic fundamentals representing the external sectors were not encouraging either. We had been high current account deficit and huge dependency on foreign capital flows. To
yeah,
give you a little more nuanced approach understanding, that if you're trying to understand per se from industrialization perspective, which is the focus of our discussion, we can briefly divide this into two phases. One was the industrialization phase, which came about since 1950, the first 5 year plan. However, it had certain demerits. That infant industry argument perhaps was there for a much longer period, and it led to low productivity and some repressive policies. And most infant industries did not grow up to become competitive in the world markets. In the subsequent period, in the liberalization period, the reforms that were brought in, like removal of the license Raj and other policies which aimed at industrialization, it was envisaged that the industrialization would usher in manufacturing would play a greater role. But on the other hand, we see that services taking the leapfrogging, and it gained much better compared to industrialization. In fact, there was deindustrialization happening in India. If we look into this data, sir, we will see that the contribution of secondary sector did not grow much, while the contribution of the primary sector decreased. It was tertiary sector which grew, primarily led by the high-end, high-skilled services, which was the highest contributor, which was the major trends. So, in fact, if I just give you a pictorial graph, sir, that will be a better quick understanding, sir. If we see here in the first part, we see that while the share of agriculture and the primary sector reduces, the manufacturing does not expand much. It's on the contrary, the services which grows. In
mm,
fact, even if we look it by the share of employment as well, we see that it was the share of employment has did not accrue much to the industrialization.
mm,
That was absolutely because of this low growth in the secondary sector.
mm,
However, this high-end skilled services sector was much more capital intensive, as it is always. So it led to a situation of jobless growth in India. However, if we go back, we see that in the recent periods, India has again tried to refocus its industrialization, but this time we are trying to get into a policies of selective industrialization, like the Make in India and the PLI schemes, which were trying to perhaps replicate the East Asian or the Chinese models of export oriented manufacturing policies.
yeah,
Based on this context, sir, we propose two arguments. First argument says that Indian industrial policy focusing on export oriented manufacturing will not be suitable for India. And the
okay,
second argument says we argue for an hybrid model with manufacturing should cater to the not to the external sector, but much more to augment and boost the domestic demand. We believe that the growth in manufacturing could lead to more could help ease the unemployment problem to a certain extent, and services to be expanded, and also to focus on the world market for our export growths. So for the first argument, that is why industrial policy is not export oriented. Sir, we look at, sir, thank you for sending the paper last in the last team uh, discussion. So we
yeah,
basically focus on three papers. These are the we have also I have also tried to refer to some other papers, but basically we try to concentrate on these three papers to set our arguments. First is the South-South divergence from the paper 20 of 2024 that you sent, which says that in the late industrializations like India face greater competition and the lower state capacity than early East Asian industrialization. So the situation is markedly different now. So perhaps
mm,
replicating the East Asian model would not be a feasible thing to do.
mm,
Second, sir, from your paper on 2020 on the Chinese model, the limitations of the Chinese model, again, sir, you have highlighted how why export-oriented growth has its own limitations, and which is very more true in this current period, wherein we see that there has been more inward orientedness, trend of towards deglobalization. And we also substantiate our argument with Roderick's 2016 paper on premature deindustrialization, which says
yeah,
that many emerging market economies, including India, are facing this declining manufacturing employment and lower GDP levels
mm,
compared to what had happened in the East Asian. Automation and reshoring, that is the new technology in advanced economies, limit this low end manufacturing opportunities, particularly for export orientedness.
mm,
We further, sir, to build on this, sir, we take more insights from the paper 2024 paper on South-South divergence, when where we say that the infrastructural gaps, the labor market rigidity, and the inability to compete with export giants like China in a cost-effective manufacturing could limit this export-oriented manufacturing program that India is trying to take
mm,
more. So which is again we can aid this argument by this global demand slowdown, particularly led by increased protectionism and geopolitical tensions which are evident in the current context of the world economy.
mm,
Again, sir, another issue that comes up here is the environmental and social costs, which also demand significant attention, because India's high emission industries focused on exports could clash with India's climate goals and cause further socio-economic inequalities. And the unemployment problems will also not be addressed to a great extent through this export-oriented manufacturing scheme to uh, now this was the problem that we stated in argument 1. In argument 2, we try to diagnose the problem that we stated in argument 1, when we say that there is a case for a hybrid industrial policy for India.
mm,
And this is again taken from these 3 papers that I have said. The basic structure: the industrialization must be tailored to domestic advantages rather than replicating past models. The one of the key takeaways from the South-South Divergence paper by Frankema Bond 2024, sir, your paper on the critique of Chinese model, and Roderick's policy of flexibility, which says that a hybrid blend targeted manufacturing with services-led growth might be suitable for certain emerging market economies like India. So to build on this, sir, what we are trying to say, we are developing state-specific industrial clusters, which was also highlighted by Frank Nema in 24 paper, the green tech and renewable energy. And sir, moreover, sir, the Frank Nema's paper says that the left developer should capitalize on their unique comparative advantage, which India has clearly as advantage in services compared to manufacturing, which I will outlay here in few one slide here. So what our hybrid strategy says is domestic demand plus high value services plus regional industrialization, which can lead to a resilient growth process in India, and that this should be the structure of the industrial policy in the coming way and could be the way forward. So this slide, which shows that India compares the Indian and Chinese exports as a percentage of GDP, which see that
mm,
the GDP India has been catching up with the Chinese exports, and this was, if you look at Chinese exports, sorry sir, if you look at Chinese exports, services exports and Indian services exports. So this data is not there, but there is the we see that in fact Indian exports in the commercial services has outpaced the Chinese uh, services exports since pre-COVID period.
mm,
So possibly India has a better chance in services, and we should not neglect in what we already have a comparative advantage while we are trying to focus for a manufacturing thing. So if we try to expand our services to fintech and other things, like we already have uh, advantage in certain like digital economy, and where we are progressing fast, we should capitalize on this and expand to um, the other services enabled sectors like healthcare, education, logistics. So, sir, in to conclude, argument one, which presents the diagnosis that the traditional export led industrial policy may not be feasible, we take forward to understand argument two, which is the prescription, which says that the hybrid model may be a better answer to the current problems India is facing.
mm.
And this book will aim to contribute to the conversation by offering a comprehensive framework for rethinking India's industrial strategy. So now we look forward to your suggestions. And sir, to one
So
more thing, sir, I have just
I'll probably come here, Abhishek. Yeah.
yes, yes,
So so just to very quickly conclude, Professor, so the idea of having a two-part argument approach is to take into consideration what we had discussed in the first argument. That is, India should not considerably make a policy mistake of replicating a China
Indeed.
style
Yeah.
export
Yes.
oriented industrialization model.
Yeah.
Um, and the evidence of making that argument is that the policy approach made by the government so far has been
Mm.
focused heavily on manufacturing as against services. So the data recently that has also come out says merchandise exports have gone down and service exports are going up for India.
Mm.
So we're making then, as a result of that, the argument too, which is you need some kind of a hybrid strategy,
Yeah.
not either or. You need manufacturing to cater to domestic demand, which currently is
Mm.
being competed. So a lot of the domestic manufacturing in apparel, garments, clothing, all of this is being provided by Bangladesh, Vietnam, Thailand. You know, a lot of the countries which are producing cheaper products than India. So what we need is a focus towards domestic oriented manufacturing
Yeah.
and export oriented service sector strategy, which is helpful for even employment generation. So the chapterization you see in front of you, which is the 4 5 chapters we have mentioned,
Yeah.
uh, the chapter one, which was the case of talking about the rise and fall of export led industrial policy. This was where we were hoping that you could tell us where and how we do not, or we talk about the limitations of the China model. Because the first chapter would lay the foundation of saying that while India is growing, while India is emerging, while India is developing, it should try learning from economic history, not make the same mistakes China did. So that's sort of our beginning interface. And then we dive deeper from chapter two onwards into the Indian story,
Mm.
looking more closely at its structural economic realities, talking about the model that Abhishek was saying, which builds principally a lot from Danny Roderick's thesis, as you see, because Roderick is sort of talking about this not either or strategy. So there's a lot of discussion in industrial policy right now is saying, oh, manufacturing is not work, you need to focus on services. And the
Mm.
interpretation of that has been taken as that we are not focusing on manufacturing at all, which is not the case. Clearly, we're saying that manufacturing is important. In India, it's a job creating sector in micro, small, medium scale enterprises. So the MSME sector creates a lot of jobs. It has been struggling over the last 8 years. So we do want to make the argument that MSME should get a real big boost. It helps with jobs as well. But having said that, we are looking at services as being the export oriented strategy for trade. So those points, as we have discussed, Professor, we are more or
Yeah.
less clear with what we are trying to do. But I think where we were really hoping for you to weigh in was in terms of the writing of chapter one, which is the laying of groundwork of not making the East Asian or China style sort of model mistake. Yeah.
Mm. Anything else?
No, that would be all, Professor, at this point. Yeah.
Okay. And any comments from Adit?
Aditi has been helping us at the back end with a lot of data work. I wanted her to join because
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Understand. Well, I'm pleased to see this taking shape. One literature which all Asian societies, exporting Asian societies ever since say 1600 should consider. Can I post it?
Yes, Professor.
Can I
The
share
chat
this
box. In the chat box, yeah.
chat box? Chat box.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, let me
Should
try.
should I stop sharing? Then perhaps he would be able
Yeah,
to
stop
share your
sharing.
screen.
Can I share screen? Okay,
Hmm.
sharing. Let me see. I think that's the document. That's
Yeah,
part
show.
of the teaching. Yeah.
Yes, Professor.
Mint. Yeah.
Yes,
1958.
yes,
Land
yes.
for surplus. Okay. All Asian societies, ever since the beginning of the Gamma and the later East India companies like the Dutch, French, and English, we need to consider why and how we link to the rest of the world, and that is a huge historical heritage and sort of package we all suffer. So I think this should apply to India. So that's my my kind of a concern. So we are not cutting our history from the past. We believe history continues. Yeah, and in the Chinese case, I think China and India were both historically product-rich societies. We export a lot. Yeah, and then the economy gradually shaped to the current kind of a, if you like, model, and we still suffer the consequences in the past. So this is should be part of the groundwork for India and as well as China or Southeast Asia, ASEAN. So we know Indians' natural conditions are excellent for farming, all right? So this is a big problem for later development attempts because the opportunity cost will be such, people will really feel so reluctant to move away from, for example, agricultural dominance to export dominance. Even in your export, if you count Indians' structure of export, a large share will be farming. Yeah. You are the number one rice exporter, yeah, in the world. Cotton, your whatever, peanuts, yeah, spices. So that means it is very difficult to actually, in a way, to cut your history clean, complete clean. We forget our history, forget about the traditional production function for India. I think this is the historical kind of a, if you like, burden. So this should be part. That's my first suggestion. This should be part of our introduction. Yeah. So India faced different challenges when the economy moving towards modernity. Modernity can be rural, agricultural, modernity can be services, modernity can be manufacturing. So we do have three choices. Yeah. So that said, it is so wrong to copy any other civilization.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we play this card of neoclassical economics. Basically transaction costs, opportunity costs, accounting costs. So once we lay this out, everything goes. I like your idea. China shouldn't be the model for India to adopt. It is just wrong. It's just wrong. China's performance really surprises us because many reasons, many reasons, more than one. Uh, I think China's agricultural output, you know, if you like, productivity, uh, or total factor productivity should be lower than India. Yeah. And China is prone to all sorts of natural disasters, not like India. India is really, excellent place, very flat land. Part of India, you have dry farming. Part of India, you have double cropping rice or even triple cropping rice. We know the Indians never suffered really large scale famine. Everybody eats. Right? That's my impression. It's not a poor country in terms of food availability. Amartya Sen is right. Nobody should be hungry in India. So that bottom line really removes some urge for India to become modern, right? So you're lucky. It's a lucky country. So I think that part really should be reflected right in the beginning. If you compare China, China is very hilly land, extreme climates. You have cold fronts, all basically half the year from Siberia or Mongolia, Mongolian steppes. Um, you have monsoons, you have typhoon, you have earthquake. I don't think in India you suffer a lot of earthquakes. You are not in the ring of fire. China, well, you do have lots of earthquakes. It's not a good place to actually to farm. Okay, second point. I have been thinking of this problem. Why the Indian economy decide to move towards services? I mean, the Indians are you're very clever people. You know, if we play the card of David Ricardo, Adam Smith, or Homo economicus, the rational individuals, the collectively Indians decide to move towards tertiary sector services must have a reason. Please check whether this was the result of a government encouragement or not, or that's a completely democratic choice by millions and billions of Indians. Um, because you have democracy, you have a market economy. So that means the government will have less power to actually twist people's arms and say, hey, you go to cities and you produce for Samsung, you produce for Ford cars, for Toyota cars. China can do that, right? But in a private economy, market-oriented economy like India, you can't possibly push people with a piece of order, a piece of paper from a provincial governor saying, from now on, you all go. So I wonder whether this is the work of the market. Indians decide to become, they get their livelihood, so to speak, relatively easily outside the farming, and that services. Services should be so attractive. I think we should calculate the ratio between, for example, investment and and the returns. See whether this actually make any sense, right? Agriculture, highly productive. That's one choice. And then services. So services means um, orderly, actually, empirical studies all suggest services produce a lot of job opportunities. Yeah, because unlike manufacturers, you can't export services very easily. Yeah, like a barber shop, you hire 10 people in this location, in this city, in this town. You can't easily move your group to another city, certainly not overseas. Yeah. So services is really a job market kind of, if you like, job market creator. Now, whether we have a problem that Indians, democratically minded Indians, market-free Indians, all flock into that sector because the easy money to make. Rational in the beginning, then you face these unintended consequences. That means your services market now has been completely uh, saturated. So even government intervention wouldn't do much. I say that because, like the Chinese, you have a lot of developers. They build high-rise apartment blocks. How much they actually in the past 20 years they managed to build. They built 600 million blocks of high rises. That means every two Chinese will share one high rise building. Yeah. I mean, in the beginning, that was a rational choice because that's where the money really you can make a lot of money. But as you work into that, definitely into that part, you start to suffer the consequence, but it was too late. I wonder there's a degree of that in the Indian services. I like the idea that Indian service eventually reach the level of a plateau. It won't take in any employment opportunities. Then, should anything happen, people start to lose jobs. So that market was just oversupplied. I wouldn't say this is a mistake by the state planners because this is a free market. You can't you just give people license and then you tax them. So it's a complete take and give relationship. But there's no way you can actually plan. For example, how many butchers, how many vendors of vegetables and fruit in your street you should have. And people just follow the money. Once you have money, they just go. And if money is easy, many more people will come. Until that, you have that's a typical supply and demand, and equilibrium and oversupply and so on and so forth. So I wonder this part should be considered as not the Indian government strategy. Rather, it is the work of free market. Yeah. Okay. Now you're absolutely right about the COVID. What COVID did was to send a shock to the market, and everybody suffered, but not equally. I think the services suffered most. Yeah, therefore, immediately it created problem. Oversupply already started before COVID. Once you have COVID, some businesses basically were doomed because once you can't go out, how can you actually purchase services? Vice versa, if the door, if the streets are closed down, how can you provide services? So demand supply, that link was artificially cut by COVID. Yeah. So that really means, although from the appearance, COVID, after COVID, unemployment start to rise, you think that must be a structural problem of the Indian economy. May not be so. I think Indian economy was doing well. If you run, for example, a growth trajectory, and take COVID out, I think the unemployment rate shouldn't rise. Make sense? Just run the trajectory, yeah. But if you factor your COVID in, the COVID actually suggests that the Indian service market was already at the edge of, oversupply. Yeah. So that should explain, perhaps in the democratic free market, be it regulated but quite free. If you have, say, 1 million rupees, you should be able to set up, for example, something like a chain of supply of certain, let's say, carry, takeaway carry food. No problem at all. You pay tax and government will let you go. But if you have 100 million people doing that, surely unemployment will occur. So market really have to tease out a equilibrium. Even in advanced G7 countries, you do have huge, it's a huge gamble, for example, to set up a supermarket chain in places like London. The Germans did it, Aldi and the Lidl, two chain supermarkets, by bargain basement prices. And this really caused a lot of unemployment among other supermarkets. So this really is a way to force your competitors out. And in doing so, of course, it's a zero sum, right? Some win, some lose. So other supermarkets they have to suffer. They really have to suffer. So that part, I think, may not be the Indian growth, industrialization, globalization strategy. Rather, this is an Indian domestic market structure. I think freedom offers people's choices, and choices led to the extraordinary growth in tertiary services sector. And this becomes a problem after 20 years, because you realize this is not going to make India industrialized, right? I think this is a typical kind of a zero sum. If enough people, they are fond of providing services and self-employment, freedom, and they get along with each other, and they just forget about manufacturing. Manufacturing is hard. Yeah, the discipline of factories are really inhumane. Yeah, your face machines is boring. Yeah, I wouldn't go to factories myself. I would rather become, a peddler. So you talk to people, you make friends, you see things, you have fresh air. Yeah, that kind of lifestyle really is, is freedom, democracy. not like army, the industrial army of the Russians and Chinese and Koreans, push people in, and you have, kind of a, you treat people harsh, and then you push for industrial output. So in a way, Karl Marx and Engels are still right. Factories are not humane enough. Factories is kind of a modern slavery. If you have that in mind, you do have problem like in India. People are born free, and you have democracy, you have human rights, and how hard that will be to persuade enough Indians to become, factory workers. You do need a critical mass to change the Indian economic structure. So that part was easily done in China, but I assume in the democratic society, unless you really offer high wages, and B, you do have, you know, other things to attract people to basically give up services to become, to become factory workers. Otherwise, your manufacturing sector will face some sort of a bottleneck. You see, in Tokugawa and Meiji Japan, they had terrible time to basically to get enough recruit enough workers during their first attempt of industrialization. They bought machines from France, but nobody come to work. Guess what? They order all these samurai wives, this high social status, not as high like the barman class in India, but really they are the uh, they are the aristocracy class in Japan. They just force their wives and daughters to work as factory workers. That changed the culture. All of a sudden, okay, that's acceptable now. Yeah. So social conditions in rural societies, highly productive rural societies, could be such that people just do not want to become industrial workers. And that will be a problem. You can't recruit enough people unless you offer high wages. If you offer high wages, you won't have international competitiveness. So the loop just wouldn't actually work for you. In China, not a problem. They just force people in, give them low salaries or low wages. People do not have a lot of human rights. They're not free. Oh, they make a living. They flock them into dormitories, lock them up for 3 years, and then they have a new group to replace them. This goes on now and until you build a superpower of manufacturing. So you're absolutely right. All the fundamental conditions in India differ from China. So copying China will be a mistake. 100%. Absolutely. Secondly, India, ever since World War II, had a tradition of ISI. So that's industrialization, import substitution industrialization. That worked, actually. For example, in terms of the Indians' iron steel production, Indians' defense. Yeah, you did it. You did it. But if you continue to play ISI, you won't have the international competitiveness, and you can't export your locally made manufacturers to the rest of the world. We all know that ISI is supported by subsidies and tariff protection. So that model was dead, right? Nobody likes ISI anymore. But you, but however, you can build your railways, you can build your defense industries, you can do a lot of things like energy. As long as you know this is something you you can afford domestically. You're not inviting foreign companies to compete against you, and also you are not exporting your domestically nurtured, for example, uh, companies to take over the rest of the world. That's fine. You are insulated. That's fine. So once you decide to play the model of China, that insulation should be abundant. So China basically decide to give up ISI ever since Mao died, and it was very difficult transition to switch from ISI to EOI. EOI is export-oriented industrialization. So that transition really nearly wrecked the rule of Chinese Communist Party because we are talking about 30 to 40% unemployment rate.
Mm.
Now, countries like India, you just cannot do it because people will vote you out. In
Mm.
China, we have guns. What can you do, right? You just put up with this, and government give you Mickey Mouse kind of unemployment benefit for about 10 years, and you just keep praying, keep your fingers crossed, and see whether new jobs can one day fall on your doorway and say, okay, Mr. Wang, you have a job. So this is the basic bless of the Communist Party. Yeah. So social control, maybe in terms of state capacity, that degree of social control, certainly give China enormous space to basically absorb shocks, including shocks of changing from ISI to EOI. But that social ability, that ability to absorb shocks just wouldn't exist in countries like India. Yeah. So again, what makes China is so specific in terms of state type, state capacity, the ruthlessness of the communist rule. People just wouldn't stand up saying, why is my human rights? Why is my benefit? I work for you. You are the new breed of bourgeoisie. You get everything. What happened to us? What is it in it for us? So these questions very common. This common question coming from the grassroots, from ordinary people, just wouldn't have a chance to be voiced in China. So that's a political context. That means in that regard, ordinary people in India wouldn't be ordered by the state. Yeah, but ordinary Chinese was, if the government gave them the order to march, they will march. And if a government said, "Well, you jump," the ordinary people will say, "How high should I jump?" Yeah, that's almost like the second Soviet Union. It happened in Soviet Union too. All right. People say, China had a long tradition long history and history continued. No, in my view, China's history, long tradition stopped in 1949. Yeah. Ever since China adopted the Soviet system, the old China, which was semi-democratic, certainly private ownership was everywhere. People set up, little shops, factories, people farm. That kind of economy already died. Yeah, already completely died. Yeah. So that social condition, because of we talk about south to south divergence, institutionally speaking, that divergence was so obvious between India and China. So we we praise China's often wrongly, because we see all the end results and believing those results, justify what China did to its own people. I think that's wrong. Meanwhile, if you judge all the end results of India, saying you blame the Indians, this is wrong, this is wrong, I think that can be normative thinking, all countries should become industrialized, manufacturing should take over, services should be, one third of economy, and so on and so forth. That will unnecessarily cause problems, because that will cause a lot of misunderstanding, I think. So whether or not, that's why I believe Miant Vent for Surplus may give us some new light for the Indian case. Indian was or has been less organized by the state, more organized by the market. So if you allow market to function fully, services will be number one choice. And that will give us a lot of weight in this book. Yeah. And also this will separate, the the mainstream arguments saying everybody should follow the China's model.
Mm.
I don't. I think China's model is basically, the good old days, seems to me, is over. Yeah. You can only do so much. Yeah. But I do have a lot of hope with Indian economy. I mean, you produce a lot of geniuses. You have good people running huge companies in the West, right? And you have people in Silicon Valley, CEOs. It's not human capital talents. No, Indians are good. Yeah, you must be on the top of the intelligence in the group, in the world. It is the political kind of a heritage which casts your future in a special way. So that's once we have that explained, we probably everything else will become very natural. Different stages, why and how Indians like services, whether this is overgrown or not. How can we correct this? Maybe from you know uh, invisible hand, yeah, plus visible hand, persuade people don't go to services, try to do manufacturing. Don't go to hardware manufacturing, go for AI, yeah, which is a kind of a service, but you do have your hardware, such as you have huge computing, uh, if you like, investment in AI sector, and you charge people from the services that you provide. And yeah, I think foreign direct investment certainly is a area to look at. China's way to attract foreign direct investment is quite obvious. They give a lot of privileges to foreign investors, often beyond what law permits. In China, it's called specific tailored policy. So if you go to the Chinese state council saying, I'm who and who, I'm Elon Musk, I want to build Tesla car factory in Shanghai, give me a specific tailored policy. The government will go all the way to abandon all the laws to give you free electricity, build a road for you, free water, give you, for example, 50,000 university graduates, engineer or whatever, uh, majors, and all highly qualified, and you pay them 50% of wages, and the government will give them 50% of wages. How about that? So they go all the way. And when you look at the deals, they're not market oriented deals. They're just government visible hands all the time. Yeah. It is silly not to build factories like Tesla in China because basically half of the cost will be really carried by the state of China. And so Elon Musk can really produce cars very high quality, very cheaply. There's no competitor can compete with him for next 20 years, I believe. So if you ask Indian government, how about copy what the government is doing with Elon Musk? Can you do that? Guess what? People will vote you out. Yeah, thinking why you do you do so much for foreign company and at the expenses for our own people. Yeah, such a question cannot be even asked in China. Yeah, so so that's FDI. So the government will each year will have a quota, and the quota will be sent to every province. Yeah, and you will put your career on on the line if you do not fulfill that FDI quota in all provinces. So you do everything to lure foreign direct investment in. So the government wouldn't say by what means, but you do. Yeah, you do whatever free land, typically free land. Yes. I think that's probably
One of the things that no, this was very helpful, Professor Abhishek. Of course, I'll give some. We have been speaking on some of these issues for now a few meetings. So the text by Mint was something I had actually shared post my arrival over the last in-person meeting. I think it might have sort of not gone into the discussion we had today, but I did mention of Mint's work as a classical interface. We could sort of go back at that. I think it's a very good idea to keep that as a foundation in talking about the classical interface of where and how you may
yeah,
have the sort of the vent for surplus
yeah,
narrative to begin, and then sort of talk about the limitations of the supply side neoclassical Chinese model, and
correct.
then talk more about where India's comparative I think it's a very useful point that you've made. Before I ask Abhishek and Aditi if they have anything to add, to say
Mm,
or ask, which is the point on agriculture. I think we were too much focused around the manufacturing versus services point, but you've made a very salient point that since you have 45 to 50% of your population engaged in agrarian work. In fact, this number has increased in the recent PLFS data, the periodic labor force survey data, because of the absence of good jobs.
Yes.
And what we needed to keep in mind while framing this proposal was to say that India is structurally facing a jobless growth situation right now. There is growth, it's a growth of over 6%, but much of this growth is not distributively creating good jobs, right? That's a big policy question. So,
Mm.
where do the good jobs come from, right? So, we've mentioned that in urban areas, services tend to create a lot of jobs, not just in high value skilled services areas, but also low value, semi skilled areas as well.
Mm.
Manufacturing, MSME, as I said, is a big area which does create job, but it's been struggling, right?
Yes.
Last 8 years have seen the MSME sector decimated. COVID was a big blow, and then there have been other issues as well.
Mm.
But talking about agriculture and increasing agricultural productivity, because there is a high export need for India to contribute to the world's food supply,
Yes.
is a very salient point. And I think that brings me to a sort of a interface that towards the end, maybe Abhishek, we need to have a chapter which specifically looks at the how politics matters in economic choices. You know, this fact that China made mistakes because of the lack of decentralized democratic agency, and the fact that
Yes.
India has a democratic, reasonably much more democratic choice influence in decision making.
Mm.
Professor Deng is right that you can't have a situation of 40% unemployment and nothing happening at the level of government. Even though a lot of arguments recently are being made that economic well-being and prosperity is not going into electoral decision making, but we do clearly see that there is evidence that if people are getting or seeing, experiencing higher economic well-being, they tend to vote for that particular party or that particular government. So
Yeah.
it might be useful to say and that add in that hybrid economic model story how agricultural productivity matters as much as manufacturing and services, because
Mm.
for the Indian scenario, the labor market is very fragmented. There's a huge population in agricultural sector, so you might not experience structural transformation of people moving from agriculture to manufacturing and to services, like something like which some countries in 20th century saw. So we have to make
Mm.
peace with the fact that it's okay to have people in agriculture, but make agriculture more profitable and productive in that spirit. I think that's a very important point that has
Mm.
come out from this conversation. The role of democratization in industrial policy choice, the role of agriculture, uh,
Yeah.
the sort of larger classical theory interface of international trade. I think those 3 points are very helpful. Abhishek, do you want to sort of come in, add, or clarify, because this is perhaps a good opportunity for us to clarify, and Aditi as well, if there's something you want to do. Yeah, please, Abhishek. Yeah.
Sir, thank you first for your great insights. Sir, I had one question. You talked about the Chinese case where there was some amount of market, but majorly it was government directed industrialization, which we cannot replicate in India. That's true. That sir, because of that was possible in China because of the autocratic system that there is, and we have a totally separate system of a democracy in India.
Yeah.
Sir, you while talking about the Indian case also, sir, you said that there is perhaps more role of market and perhaps some role of government. Should we not focus on this aspect that also key that the government also has a role to play in this uh, current context? While we
Mm.
are thinking of industrialization, we talked about agriculture, which we had totally missed, which we will try and incorporate that the role of agriculture, services, and
Mm.
manufacturing. But
Mm.
where do you think the government should step in the Indian case?
Mm. Mm. Well, that's very hard. If you have democracy, which is a blessing, then normally in a democratic society, you do not make a choice of extremes, you make a choice to accommodate the majority. Now, if historically that majority was peasantry, you have problem. You do. Yeah. How can you actually persuade the peasantry not to believe in farming? Yeah. I think there's a moment though in the 70s, you have a green revolution, remember? That could be the moment to persuade a lot of the Indians say, okay, why don't you go to cities? We now grow the miracle rice. You are not needed. Go to cities, So let's say, for argument's sake, counterfactually, what if in that moment, major cities provide jobs, plus in rural India, you have, green revolution that could transform the society at one go, 10 years, done. But unfortunately, there was no matching industrial policy to take people from the rural economy. They just produce better rice. Yeah, for the short term, everybody's happy. Why not? But there's nothing to change the structure. So again, this is meant for surplus, right? Terribly rational, terribly democratic, terribly, if you like, in a way of economic, future, terribly path dependent. Basically, you play the card of your father and your grandfathers. They were farmers, so you should be farmers too.
Mm.
Make sense?
Yeah.
I think Green Revolution, that moment was missed. We should blame the government, really. When you
Mm.
look at the Indians, historical change moments, there are few moments. One is independence, the other one is actually Green Revolution. So pity there's no matching industrial policies to take a lot of the population from the rural
No,
sector.
and I think the third moment was post 90s, where we focused too much on services and gave up. I mean, a lot of the discussion around the great divergence in India is in the post 90s period, that services started doing better,
Yeah,
but manufacturing and industrial production got ignored.
yeah.
This is helpful. Aditi, do you want to come in just with any questions you had for Professor, or anything you wanted to clarify?
I don't have any questions so far, but I am really, really grateful for like being here and being able to listen in. It was really, really helpful. So I
Yeah.
think it provides a background in terms of how like I can look more into the data as well. So
Yes.
thank you so much.
Data. We need data. We absolutely need data. Yeah. So perhaps we should revisit Arthur Lewis dualism. Yeah.
That's a useful point.
Arthur Lewis dualism really is for the market economy. I mean, when you read his work, I did it 20 years ago. Uh, I should revisit that. He makes it so clear that higher wages is the main attraction to lure your rural people to become, workers in cities. Now, that's actually probably a good model for India. So if you calculate um, the real income from manufacturing jobs, real income, yeah, um, compare that with the rural income, real income, yeah, because we know, for example, housing in rural India is basically free, water is free, you pay something for the electricity, and that was it. Food is free. Then you factor that in your comparison, you may realize actually city jobs that really make people poorer. If so, why should you be so bothered? Even Arthur Lewis won't actually help India. Yeah.
Mm.
So make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
I hope this makes sense. I mean, I like India. I know your economy reasonably well because when I joined LSE, in the first 10 years, I taught Japan, India, and Russia.
Yes, I remember.
So it's pity, we criticized India's outcome
Mm-hmm.
without knowing why the outcome should be so natural. So that's my view, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, India will have bright future if you play all your cards correctly. You have well-educated population. You have enough food. Yeah, you are connected to G7. You are the member of your Commonwealth. You have an Indian Ocean at your doorstep, and so on and so forth. You know, maybe you should have something so completely different from the tigers and China. The Indian model should be different, and the Indian model should, because your democracy should benefit every single citizen.
Great. So,
Yeah,
Professor, what we were hoping to do following from this conversation is take insights from some of the key points that you've outlined. I think we've also, for the benefit of our own record, we've just helped record this interface, the part where you were speaking. So it will help us keep going back into
sure, do that. Yeah,
and
sure.
what we wanted to do next was, Professor, start working on the process of background reading and data, mostly to help write different chapters at different interfaces.
Yeah.
And my sense is that we want to take a couple of months to be able to put together a few chapters that we would want you to just so basically what we are looking forward from your side is only sort of at different intervals some periodic review assistance, which is the direction or the vertical in which we have a team, will put our head on it. And the manuscript proposal that we have prepared, we would also share it with the Spalgrave team, which I had told you. So we will incorporate some of the feedback of what you've said,
Sure.
move with that.
Mm,
They will, of course, get in touch with you on the contract and some of those things. So
yeah,
Abhishek, myself, and yourself would be sort of seen in that sense as principal, authors. We have Aditi. We have one more student whose name is Ankur. He has been helping us a lot with data. So we wish to have the small team. We'll
yeah.
continue the work on this. I'll talk to Abhishek at length and have a longer
Mm,
conversation. But on timelines, I should be able to put together, a few details and share with you over email. But what
mm,
I'm looking at is the next time I'm around in the UK, which is roughly around May and then June. I'll write to you.
yeah,
It would be interesting to then at that by that time have a few chapters ready, which we my hope is that by the end of this later this summer we should be having this out in the production review process.
sure.
And it's not that difficult because a lot of the background material on the Indian economy we already have. I think what we wanted to know was this very good interface that you have sort of theoretically brought in, which I feel has been lacking in the debate. The
Mm,
debate around industrial policy has not. What I'm looking in terms of title is looking at this as a political economy
it
context,
is.
because you've brought both aspects quite elegantly, which is on the economic choice and also the political state, which is
Mm,
the benefit of sort of a country like India, where you're positioned in making choices because people can have a reasonable say. China, it wasn't really the case.
correct.
In
Yes.
fact, most countries that went on a sort of an industrial export oriented strategy in the East Asian economies did so under a very authoritarian system. It was
You're
true
absolutely
with
right.
Park Chung-hee in South Korea. We have case of Lee Kuan Yew almost in that sense in Singapore, and so many East Asian markets went in that spirit. So we have an opportunity not to repeat that. So thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much for
No.
your time. My apologies for the sort
Oh,
of.
don't worry, don't worry. I
It was
also
all my mistake.
realized.
Abhishek was right, actually. Abhishek was perfectly right. He said
Yeah.
2:30, but I said maybe there's an hour change. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, and we'll
So
meet.
my conclusion
Yeah.
for today is this. Let's say that we don't write this book in a Sino-centric way or
Yeah.
Eurocentric way. We do it in a
Yes.
Hindu-centric way.
Yeah.
Okay, so everything should work so long as it's from the grassroots of India.
Mm.
The imposing, models will eventually will be mismatching of the Indians' social, economic, and ideological conditions. So they won't work. We shouldn't force it to work. But the goal is high income society
Yeah.
in India. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say that, sort of a overgrown in services is just one way to tease out and see whether this works. You tried farming, okay? Now
Yeah.
you're trying services. When you try this too, maybe it's time to persuade your people. Look, these two paths won't deliver high income to us. So for a Hindu centric path, well, let's we're good people, we're clever people. Let's work out what we can do next. Yeah, certainly not the Chinese model. Yeah, forget it. The Chinese model is not going to work. So that's my view. Anyway, you see,
That's
I'm
very
very pro India.
cool.
Okay.
Professor, I will also take this five minutes to 10 minutes just to talk to Abhishek and Aditi. So thank you, Professor, for your time. I'll just very quickly have a chat. And I'll
I
keep.
can leave, right? You want me to leave?
Yeah, you can. You may if you want. Professor, just one quick question. You're receiving my mail from the JGUID, right? I'm just confirming because you said you didn't receive the link
I
of Zoom.
didn't receive the link in the beginning. I checked my
Today
my
you received my mail.
junk mail.
You
Yeah, the second time, yes. Second time,
Okay,
not
so I
open.
will. I'll write to you from the official ID. Yes, thank you, Professor.
Okay, you have a good day, and
Thank you,
we keep talking. Yeah, we keep talking. Yeah,
thank you, Professor.
we
Thank
make
you,
we make very good progress.
thank
We
you.
make very good progress. I'm so happy that I show the limits of Chinese model.
Yes, sir.
I think that model is not going to work for India. Yeah,
Yes,
that's my view.
yes, yes.
Okay, you have a good day, and I
Thank
probably
you,
should leave. Yeah,
thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.
certainly. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So, Abhishek and Aditi, I just need a few minutes of your time, if that's okay. Um, Basically, as you know, Professor pointed out, my humble submission at this point is, see, we are on the right trajectory. Um, there is not, and Abhishek can weigh in on this a little bit more about what he thinks. What I feel is you need a stronger, and what we have today from our discussion with Professor Deng, that is a stronger theoretical interface at the beginning, which I think the first introductory and the chapter one needs to build. And I think that is connected with the closer reading of both Bent, and I think so sort of going back into this Arthur Lewis structural transformation debate context a little bit. If you look at these two as our guiding, especially Mint's, I think text, he had mentioned about this last time, that is that it was Mint's reading and contemporary interpretation which made him write about the limitations of the China model. Um, which is why he said that that's what could be your guiding interface. You give the example of China, that China was not conscious of that choice, and because it doesn't have the kind of political economy, choice architecture that a country like India has, one should be looking at the Indian case. So that was, I think, so on the theoretical part. That's one. Second, the what the point he's making around this coming more from a bottom up, sort of a data driven exercise is what, naturally, given that at the macro level it is one thing to say, but then how do we argue it from a very sectoral data driven point? um, that would be critical. So the way I see the chapterization that has been done, Abhishek, if you can quickly share your screen, there will be some element of revising maybe
Absolutely.
the initial. You have access to sharing the screen, huh?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So if you look at the, yeah, yeah. So I've just logged in from my phone. So this introduction, I believe, would change,
Mm,
because
mm,
this needs to be then a more theoretical, academically
mm,
embedded, nuanced argument, which talks a lot more about Mint and
mm,
sort of Arthur Lewis thinking around, and then basically situating India in that context, basically situating the Indian example in that context. How does it not or may fit into a different paradigm of sorts?
mm,
We then take the conversation forward in saying the, in sort of explicating more on the vent for surplus theory, saying that, well, China did follow an export led industrial policy strategy, completely supply side driven. And while it gained grounds, the COVID shock really brought it down and brought sort of a full stop to that. So chapter one is going to be more xenocentric, which is, you do talk about the China example, but in context to how the introduction is shaped. We look at then chapter two, where we talk about a macroeconomic story of India, providing a context to what you were saying today, Abhishek, about the industrialization, deindustrialization, sort of context. So the sort of pre mid 1980s position and the post mid 1980s position, and
I,
how's, sorry.
I was thinking, this part has also to be rectified a little.
No, so इसमें क्या होगा, I'll tell you, the structural and economic realities will become very contemporary. Like, you might as well want to highlight here, instead of giving a too much of a background context, uh, a scenario mapping of where India stands today, where it positions itself today, what challenges it has. And I think that would help us sort of understand that, the hybrid model that we are talking about. So chapter 3, I don't think you need to talk about the hybrid model. You
Mm,
need to sort of have an additional chapter which looks at the role of the state in driving India's, sort of industrial policy, which talks about what they've been trying to do over the last 10 years, sort of position itself more on manufacturing, less on services, but clearly the compare. So knowing, basically having a chapter which talks about knowing your comparative advantage. When you provide a sort of a macroeconomic background or context, then where do we sort of have a specific discussion on knowing our comparative advantage? Where does India really have its own comparative, and the comparative advantage we're talking about is split between a discussion both, on the economic landscape and also on the political side, which is where we say that, well, you do have this sort of a social democracy led, or social democratic, feedback check, a point that, Pratap Bhanu Mehta often makes, that India had that for a long time, which is, you had the social democratic, figment of a very fragmented, ethno-linguistically diverse society, which never allowed for a greater centralization of either economic or political principles, right? Even for, that a large scale ideological mobilization level. I mean, to his argument more recently, he said that it's changed with the rise of the BJP, but what we can definitely say is in terms of economic decision making, given that we still have relatively more, um, democratic core, the comparative advantage for India needs to be balanced between services and manufacturing. And then I think you have that chapter which you lay down more in detail, the hybrid model. Now, but I want to sort of just ask you what you think in terms of restructuring or revising.
So this knowing your comparative advantage, this is what I was saying. We also have to bring about how on the discussion that we had when we discuss about this political landscape. Then I
Yeah.
think we will also have to bring in the discussion that he pointed out about the Green Revolution, wherein India missed the bus. Secondly, when he pointed out the 1990s, we should have been much more balanced.
So I was thinking that when you have the background political economy context that you're writing, in that there is, so what is called as theories of economic change, right? So episodes of economic change for
Hmm.
India.
Hmm.
इसमें अगर आप कुछ specific instances बता रहे हो कि भाई 1991 was that like period, of economic change. Then in the case of Green Revolution, there was that period of economic change. So we definitely see those as opportunities missed in a certain way, but it helps us. Why are we talking about that historical context? It helps us understand the nature of structural challenges India faces now. So we provide an economic history explanation of those challenges, keeping in mind that there were certain opportunities missed. If we sort of put it in that way, and then in the next chapter you talk about more specifically the way, okay, where is the comparative advantage for India now? I mean, where does India stand now? Because you're looking for a forward direction.
Hmm.
There are three parts to the exercise, right? Part one is a theoretical interface on the approaches to trade policy, economic policy, structural transformation we're talking about, which talks about limitations of China style model and all of those. Part two looks a lot at the background context of India. It talks about more about knowing comparative advantage, where it stands today, what are its challenges, and part three is a sort of a forward-looking vision for the Indian context, right? So if you would have seen his comments on part three were not extensive, because he's saying that part three is dependent on a closer understanding of your part two opportunities missed, what challenges you have, and knowing from history that don't do what sort of China did. So that's what he's saying, that your forward looking vision has to understand or amalgamate thoughts from part one and part two. So I think that's where this is positioned. As in, I think as a manuscript, I feel if you look at where your theoretical base is, let's look at, for example, yes, Mint and Lewis sort of structural transformation framework, which is the forward vision for India has to be focused on wage proliferation. The fact that wages and where wages are going to be higher, you'll find more people moving into that sector. So for the Indian scenario, it is services. Predominantly, services are where wages have been higher. There's also greater formalization there. So yes, that fits well within the theory. The other is that from a domestic demand mapping purpose, where there is higher rural consumption, MSMEs and boosting MSMEs is critical. The point I made on agricultural productivity is one more salient, with the fact that because India has endowed comparative advantage as being a big agri exporter, it shouldn't completely discount of that comparative advantage. Is moving too much towards sort of a manufacturing service sector led economy. But we are on the same page on that, right? Like I don't think
Hmm.
that we have any differences there. I think there is, the idea is that yeah, you can have your agri export market protected and expanded while sort of directing resources towards domestic demand, manufacturing, and services for the external sector. So ये जो तीन chapter हैं, basically my sense is your chapterization would change, of course, entirely in some way or the other. But
Hmm.
these chapters that you have, chapter 4, 5, and the concluding chapter, this I would believe you might need to have for the hybrid model, sort of one detailed long chapter, in this is part three of the text, Part two is looking more at India's background context, economic history, knowing comparative advantage, what challenges it has. And part one is the sort of theoretical interface, knowing what not to do, types, which is sort of laying the foundation for us. So that's the sense I have. I think there's a lot more, I feel, of critical review of literature, which will accompany along with this, with uh, database reading. And this is where I think, Aditi, what we need to do is create, in consultation with Professor Abhisek, a very detailed work allocation plan, um, which is what I would probably suggest as the next step for you guys to do, which is have a very clear understanding of what's that is needed over the next month, over the next 2 months, over the next 3 months. Once we know of that and have a clear understanding, I'll and Abhishek, we can then meet on campus in the coming week, one of the days when you want to. And isko thoda sa then we should map it. I was thinking initially that Ankur and Aditi can be the two main sort of researchers who can really be there. And if you need an additional hand, there's a person who's joining us, is a development studies scholar, Krishna, but he's going to be very new to the office. So he's going to take a little time. But if you have someone in mind as a, so I mean, you have to decide what work allocation plan needs to be devised, based on the revised chapterization, which will clearly be reflected in your revised draft of the manuscript, which we would have to pitch. I'm of the view that we should try writing in this case. Usually, what I generally say is that in some cases you might want to write the manuscript first and then reach a publisher, because in a lot of cases, if you are too quick in releasing your idea, the sort of the grander idea, there might be already additional reviewers, 2 or 3 reviewers, who would give you a lot of suggestions. So you're almost compelled to incorporate those, even if you may or may not be principally
Want
aligned
to.
with that.
Yeah.
So I would probably say is that writing the manuscript and then approaching, a paragraph, and which is completely doable in that period of time, which is if we take the next. So I'll tell you, मेरा objective इसमें पूरा exercise में ये था कि by end of May we should be in a position that there is a draft that we can share with Professor Deng of this larger sort of text, and we just ask him to weigh in specifically on certain chapters. He may have thoughts that we may want to incorporate, which will take its own time. Like there might be certain things for which we might take a few weeks, and then by principally by end of the summer break, right, like we have approached and then confirmed. It takes 1 month at the bare minimum, with a publisher to sort of let us know that whether they're moving forward, what they're doing. And you will have both interest in both, you'll have interest in trade publishers and academic publishers both, likewise, for subject like this, because it is very also contemporary and hard pressing, right now. So that opens always your options. But let me see how we are closely, building this forward. If you have, yeah, Abhishek, anything you wanted to add, say, or like, I think we can remove the uh, shared screen option. Yeah, I'm able to see. हाँ, any thoughts you have, like कि ऐसे क्या इसको आगे क्या करना है?
I think that's a good target that we have set.
हाँ,
We should not relax. What I was thinking is we write the
हाँ,
introductory chapter, wherein we lay down the foundation of what will be the next chapters. And
हम्म,
then perhaps if we can share in with Professor Deng and
हम्म.
then ask him to modify it. If he is wanting some
I think you will
changes,
find him doing it when he sees the final document. जितना
the
मुझे,
entire document.
हाँ, because
Acha.
एक reason है. Because my sense is the third part he has not fully grasped right now,
Hmm.
which is your forward vision that you're trying to put. So
That
I'm
is what I was trying to come and ask him.
yeah. So I understand where he's coming from, because he's a professor of economic history. So he's trying to orient our thinking that look at the history, look at the theory, and look at the fact that why a country should sort of learn from the history and the theoretical interface.
Hmm.
And it's based on that, whether you call it a hybrid model or whether you call whatever, that's what the decision making should go in. But I do understand that there is a need for postulating an interface which has a certain
Theoretical base.
I mean theoretical base, but also in the forward looking vision, it is also embedded in some academic nuance. Like हम
Hmm.
ऐसे ही नहीं कह सकते कि हाँ
Hmm.
India should focus on agriculture, manufacturing and
Hmm.
services.
Hmm.
It's too like weak in its sense of reasoning.
Hmm.
So we do have with Roderick's, I think, interface a very strong base that yes, you can focus on manufacturing, domestic demand, you
Hmm.
can focus on services at the higher sort of outward level. And in the Indian context, because there is a huge population in agriculture, huge population dependent on agriculture exports. So it's important for India to also realize. I think he made a very important point, which I think I did not initially think is it's difficult to get peasants to get into like because
Industrial jobs.
industrial jobs. And
Hmm.
India's problem has classically been that because a
Hmm.
lot of there are not many people in farming, there are not many people in agricultural work, right? There are not many people in I mean agricultural work in the sense that they're not farmers, they are farm
Landowners.
but they so it's mostly the farming is being left to a bunch of people who are not owning the land, so they're basically वो बंधुआ मजदूर वाला हालत है.
हाँ,
अब
peasants.
चाहे वो कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्क में करें चाहे वो फार्म वर्क में करें, it's like the state of being is not in any way changing.
The
And
informal sector that we have in
that is a very important point that I think we need to talk about. And the challenge is that, see, presenting a roadmap saying that at a macro level this will work and that will not work will not change the course of development for the country unless and until the workers are seeing a shift in their state of being, in their sort of occupational status. And for that to happen, you need some kind of a mapping strategy, which will bring us to a part three discussion, which is what we want to do. That there is needs to be a certain theoretical and policy interface. So we are trying to bridge that so-called intellectual bankruptcy within the policy environment right now, and saying that there is a way out only if provided you sort of look at the facts, know your comparative advantage, and focus on that. So I think the structure will for a manuscript like this will become for a any reviewer, even including Professor Deng, it will be much easier for him when he looks at the whole picture. And उसके basis पे हम भले ही उसके बाद थोड़ा सा time लें. Like when you draw out the entire sort of thing in front of him, he would have the canvas to be able to look at it. In fact, I'll not limit it to Professor Deng himself. I'll also talk to Moitrishta once Ikbar in the Department of Economics, LSE ma'am, because he's been working on industrial policy questions as well, but from a different labor and
Hmm.
employment
Hmm.
standpoint. So we can take a multiple set of inputs which
Hmm.
will go into the process. So what happens is Professor Deng's reasoning is coming from a rich understanding of economic history.
Hmm.
But I'm also aware that we also need to be conscious of the fact of what is the sort of way forward and how that needs to be mapped. So you can have always a couple of people taking a look at it. may मतलब हम अभी जो अपना रखेंगे कि एक जो चैप्टर बना रहे हैं इंट्रोडक्टरी, we will definitely share with him saying that this is what we are going forward, but the next time you hear from us we want you to sort of look at the larger file. The what you want to do internally is two things: revise your book, sort of I mean manuscript vision based on what we are discussing today, revising your sort of chapterization, looking at work allocation, strategically looking at things now, over the next course of like a week or so. Then we sit down and say, okay, this is the roadmap. If we have 3.5 months to really put our head on it, so then there has to be that, in Aditi, in your case, that kind of commitment time. You have to really look at the manuscript in that sense. So वो हमें थोड़ा सा वो करना है. I will also want undivided attention of any research scholar sort of spending time on this, which is why it's better to work with students who are committed, like not someone
Hmm.
we don't know. सो ये इंटरनली डिस्कस कर लो. मुझे आप अभिषेक जब नेक्स्ट स्टेप बताओगे, when you will say that let's meet and talk, so I'll do that then. Yeah.
I just wanted one more thing. You just also think over to make this a little different
Yeah.
or substantially different from what others are arguing in this field. Even if that case,
I think we are
Roderick,
already doing that, Abhishek. Mint का theoretical जो interface ले रहे हो ना आप, Mint
that
का
is one. That will be a major thing. What I was trying to think, when we are talking about a hybrid model, we
yeah.
should think of the role of the government as well.
No, so that's the point. We would say that the role of industrial policy and decision making coming from state design needs to be aware of some of these factors and some of these aspects. So, but I mean, to make a claim that state should be doing something or state should not be, that would be far fetched. See, that's where Rajan and I think Lamba got it a little bit. They got very preachy with their text that, oh, this is not. What we can say is that, oh, matlab, I'm looking at it more from a Ajit Ghosh sort of
Perspective,
perspective, which is कि भाई देखो ये facts हैं. तो अगर इंटरवेंशंस चाह रहे हो तो इंटरवेंशंस तभी हो पाएंगे जब ये फैक्ट्स को आप ड्यूली एक्नॉलेज करो एंड you sort of look at it. And I think that's pretty much it. What model works, we can give a detailed idea of the model. We present that model, we discuss that model, we use the text as an interface to make strong claims. My idea is that there will be a 6-month media sort of strategy on this. A text like this coming out will have a lot of discussion. A lot of people may want to know, what you have in mind. But saying that the government should or should not do something is only driven by the fact that of the historical case of China committing certain mistakes. And we saying that, well, the government, like if you provide a critical assessment of Make for India, PLI, then you fall in the trap of what you're saying, which is already a lot of people are doing that. Well, he's saying that, yeah, I mean, the data says clearly that things have worked and not worked. The push towards manufacturing has not. So when you're talking about the current challenges, you can just say that, well, by state design, there are few. See, this opportunities missed wala point jo hai na, the point that it will bring everything into light. It will bring discussions around, sort of green revolution. It will bring insights from 91. It will also bring some insights around 2014 and post that. So you will map, it's a sort of a contemporary history reflection that we had opportunity. We did have opportunity 2014. 2014 to 16 data tells us also there was some degree of change in terms of investment, capital coming. But there are other issues. Factor reforms couldn't happen. Land reforms couldn't happen. Labor reforms couldn't happen at that speed. Many things couldn't happen, which have slowed down what this would be any sort of radical restructuring of the economy. So my sense is at the end of the day, you're right. We shouldn't be repeating what a lot are already saying. But the fact that you're choosing a very different direction to enter into the debate means that you're not entering into it from others' directions. They've not approached this as an economic history topic, really. We are doing that. And I think that is a very critical interface. तो एक हफ्ता इस पे थोड़ा सा लो. आई थिंक इंटरनली डेलिब्रेट भी करो, थोड़ा रीस्ट्रक्चर कर, वर्क एलोकेशन एक स्ट्रैटेजी बनाओ. 3 महीने का आप टाइम लो. मतलब मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि इसको 3 महीने में हमें देखना है कि हम कैसे से कैसे इसको फाइनल एक स्टेज. एंड fairly honest, 3 to 4 months in a project like this for us gives us enough ground. The moment you spend more and more time on it, I mean, then we get into the. So we want to make a strong argument, and there is always a future, edition that you may always want changes in. That's where an academic publication really helps. You can always go back into those debates and see whether you're having those conversations again, right? Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. I'll then at this point maybe take a pause. Aditi, I think you may want to have a follow-up chat with Professor Sur, and just make sure that the recording of this is taken from Kirti. The AV team से कोई है? Sorry. Thank you. शुक्रिया आपका बहुत. कोई AV team से है यहाँ जो somebody is listening?
Don't think so.
I think, yeah, then they would be. नहीं, so Aditi, कीर्ति से आप recording ले लीजिएगा session का. This will be very helpful. And based on that, you share it with also Ankur. Ask him
And me.
to do it. Yeah, I mean, of course, all of
Uh,
us, but
uh,
definitely ask Ankur to look at it. We'll also put a short bite of this, Abhishek, in sort of an ideas context. जैसे हमारा periodical आता है कि we had a small interaction with Professor Deng, and he had, because he's given his remarks almost in a in a sort of very detailed way. Good to have the sort of knowledge out. It's always good for that sense. उनसे पूछ लेंगे. तो ठीक है. Thank you guys. Thank you. हाँ, okay.
Aditi, I will catch up with you tomorrow. I have a class now. I'll have to rush for the class.
All right, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.